Welcome back to another painting guide on the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms Miniatures. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to paint Ralof, one of the named characters from the Stormcloaks faction starter set, who you can escape Helgen with at the start of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Once you are finished with this beginner tutorial, this is what Ralof will look like. And if you guys want to buy these miniatures to paint alongside me, you can find them linked down below, and you can also use the code ESO5 to get 5% off. And that also really supports the channel. As you can see though, I've already underpainted Ralof in grayscale. This is very easy to do with a spray can. I can link my video guide on how to do it below in the description, as well as my guide on basing miniatures, which can be done very cheaply. For this tutorial though, I have not yet glued his arrows onto his back, just because it's going to make it easier for you to see what I'm painting and easier for you yourself to paint him. Starting out though, we're going to use brown paint. I'm using Skeleton Horde contrast paint from Games Workshop. Alternatively though, you can just dilute some Rhinox hide or another brown paint. If you haven't yet watched my video on how to thin paint, I've already made one on that too. With this, we can start painting the leather and fur parts of the Stormcloaks armor. Notice that the paint is thinned down enough so it remains watery and translucent. This allows the underpainting of the miniature to show through, giving it a natural lighting effect. I have undercoated the miniature so the light is coming from the front, casting his back into shadow. So when I paint the leather brown, it will give a subtle hue just like in real life. For now though, we're going to ignore the leather belt straps on the model because we can just cover those later in the tutorial. It's much better to start out with the larger areas first when painting. I recommend going around the miniature twice, building up 2 layers of translucent brown paint. This will basically give the brown colour more saturation than if you just do 1 layer. Make sure that you leave the layers to dry in between though. Next we're going to be using Games Workshop's contrast paint, Ultramarines Blue. This is for the robes of the Stormcloak faction. Once again, you can see this paint is watered down so it reveals the natural highlights of the underpainting below. We will need to cover all the robed areas of the miniature in this blue contrast paint. Make sure that there are no areas of pooling or puddles of paint on the miniature, since this will lead to an uneven finish once it dries, which kind of undoes all of our hard work so far. Now you guys can see why we left the leather belt unpainted, because right now it doesn't matter too much if we're a little bit messy at this stage. We can touch up this miniature later on. Next, let's grab some Ungor flesh. This is really just a beige pale skin tone colour from Games Workshop. We're going to water this down and add it to all the areas of skin on the miniature. This is going to result in a pale Nord skin tone that's typical of the Nord race in Skyrim. Cover all the exposed skin with this paint. I do recommend doing 2 layers and letting it dry in between to create a saturated pale skin tone. So once the cloak is finished, we can paint Ralof's hair with Yarden Yellow, another contrast paint from Games Workshop. Contrast paints are really just watered down paints, and yellow works really well when you apply it to a white base paint. So just apply this to Ralof's hair, but make sure that you have washed all of the blue paint you just used out of your brush, otherwise it will turn his hair green. His hair is currently a little bit bright, but don't worry, we're going to fix this once it dries. So now we're going to go back and get some snakebite leather contrast paint, which is basically just a darker shade of brown. And I'm going to use this in all the areas of shadow on his leather armor, where the recesses are, like the underside of his bow, and picking out the diamond shaped seams along his armor. But after, you can highlight the areas of fur on Ralof's armor with Ushabti Bone once again, including his arm guards and the hem of his robes. You can also go back and highlight the features on his face with a less watered down version of Ushabti Bone. It's amazing what you can achieve with the same paint and just diluting it in different ways. Whenever painting miniatures like this, you really want to start out by first glazing the miniature in thin layers of paint before you start highlighting some of the main features. But next we're going to be using a muddy brown paint called XV88, once again from Games Workshop, to highlight Ralof's leather armor. I'm just using a watered down paint and highlighting the tip of the diamond leather pattern on his armor to give it more contrast and make it look more three-dimensional. Try to work the paint into the corners to make sure it blends from light to dark in an even sort of way. I'll be going over the areas of fur on the armor as well to add some needed variety, because obviously fur isn't just one blocked solid colour, it has different variations of brown on it. I'm also going to use this same brown to fill out the leather belt straps that hold on Ralof's armor. Really do take your time with this though, since you don't really want to make a mistake at this point. We can also fill out Ralof's satchel also using this same brown colour. Next though, we're going to go back and mix some Ultramarines blue contrast paints with Fenrisian grey, which is basically just a super light blue colour. This will give us a slight sort of turquoise blue, which we can then use to highlight Ralof's Stormcloak robes. As you can see, I'm going over the raised areas of robes with a lighter blue colour, where the light would probably be catching it. This is not completely necessary since we did previously underpaint this miniature. But as you add paint to the miniature, we're actually going to lose some of the definition in contrast that we got from those previous natural highlights. And we can add them back by highlighting those raised areas like we're doing now. After this dries though, you can also go back and redefine the recesses using Ultramarines contrast paint. But now we're going to move on to Ironbreaker, a metallic paint from Games Workshop. We're going to use this to go over the chainmail armor of the miniature, which appears on the shoulders. Make sure that you water down the paint a little bit so you don't lose any of these details completely. We also need to paint the head of the axe that Ralof has strapped to his belt. And we can also paint his metal shin guards. You'll notice that the fur armor and boots have metal straps that are holding the armor together that we can also paint as metal details. Once again, take your time on this part because we're obviously doing the finer details of the miniature at this point, and you don't want to cover the fur you previously painted. After you've filled out all the metal details though, we can use another Games Workshop paint, which is a wash. It's called Nullin Oil. This is basically just a very watered down black paint. If we then apply this over the metallic areas of the miniature, it creates a contrast and makes the metal less shiny, because obviously he's not wearing brand new steel armor, is he? As you can see, the wash sinks into the recesses of the details on the miniature and adds more contrast and depth to it. Just make sure it's not pooling in puddles anywhere, because that can ruin the appearance of the miniature and you end up with a really sort of blotchy sort of paint style. You can also go around and redefine any shadows using the wash, like the underside of the cloak and areas you think should be in shadow. This is quite a sort of weird thing that is hard to explain to people, but it really does just come from practice and getting a feeling for where the shadows would usually fall on the miniature. If I was you, try and exaggerate the shadows, because the miniature is tiny and when it's on the tabletop you're not going to be able to see all the little details anyway. We're not trying to win some kind of crazy painting competition award here after all. Next we're going to glue on and paint Ralof's quiver of arrows using Snakebite Brown to paint it. Before it's completely dry, I'm also going to use a bit of Ushabti Bone to wet blend some light onto the quiver to define some of the details. I mean, leather comes from animals and it's not just one block brown shade of colour. It has variations within it and sometimes it's a little bit rough. So you kind of want to give that appearance on the quiver of the arrows. You can also highlight the leather straps holding the quiver together in Ushabti Bone, just to give it a little bit of raised detail there as well. And there we go, that's pretty much how you paint Ralof the Stormcloak. The paint job is done aside from the base, which I'm going to create another video tutorial with, and I'll try and remember to link it below once it's done, but if not, just subscribe. Click that bell icon and then YouTube will let you know as soon as it's out. Or you can just check out my channel page and see if you can find it there by searching it. And if you guys found this video helpful, please do give it a like because it really helps support the channel. And of course, if you want another tutorial on painting any of the other Stormcloaks miniatures, just let me know in the comments section below. But most of them can be painted using this exact same technique and paints that we used to paint Ralof. I just thought he was a good example because he's not wearing a helmet and faces can be quite hard to paint. In fact, I could probably do a whole separate guide on just painting faces. Let me know if you guys want to see something like that, but thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next guide. Have a great day and goodbye.